The millionaire's daughter hadn't eaten for 2 weeks until the new nanny entered the house. A winter morning in Seattle carried the scent of old rain and a dim, silvery light that hung low over the city. On a quiet street where bare trees stood like forgotten memories, a woman pulled a small suitcase toward the last house on the block, a modern villa that looked both wealthy and lifeless. Clara Hayes stopped before the iron gate and drew a slow breath. She didn't know what awaited her beyond it. All she had was the brief line from the agency's file. Full-time housekeeper needed, accommodation provided, high salary, must be discreet and patient. She pressed the doorbell. A dry, tired woman's voice came through the speaker. "Who is it?" "I'm Clara Hayes, sent by the agency," she answered, her breath visible in the cold air. There was a mechanical click, and the gate opened slowly. Inside stretched a stone path leading to a 2-story house of glass and dark wood, surrounded by rows of maple trees streaked with moss. The air was so still she could hear her own footsteps. The woman who opened the front door was Mrs. Doyle, the Moore family's housekeeper. She wore a black suit, her short silver hair framing a pale, sleepless face. Her eyes swept over Clara from head to toe with a kind of weary caution. "Come in, it's cold out there." The door closed behind them, and at once the world seemed to change. Warmer, yes, but not kinder. The house was spotless, almost painfully so. A vase of wilted flowers slumped on the table. Family photos lined the walls. The young mother's smile in each frame so bright it only deepened the sadness around it. Clara felt she had stepped into a place where time had stopped the moment someone's laughter faded away. "Lily," Mrs. Doyle began quietly. "She's 9. She hasn't eaten in more than 20 days since her mother passed. Doctors, therapists, nothing worked. 6 housekeepers have come and gone. Mr. Moore keeps himself buried in work now." Clara listened, her gaze falling on a tray beside the staircase, a cold bowl of soup, untouched, and a small stuffed rabbit with one ear loose. Something inside her tightened. "Lily's room is upstairs, at the end of the hall," Mrs. Doyle went on. "The blue door. She's locked herself in there since the accident. Mr. Moore doesn't dare go in either. You used to be a nurse, right?" "Yes," Clara replied. "I worked in psychiatric care." "Then you know what I mean when I say this? What's most frightening here isn't the crying, it's the silence." They walked through the kitchen, bright, immaculate, lifeless. No smell of food, no sign of living. Only a note taped to the refrigerator. "Do not disturb Lily." Mrs. Doyle stopped, poured herself a cup of coffee, but didn't offer any to Clara. "You can start today, cleaning, cooking, laundry. As for the girl, if you're lucky, she'll look at you once." Clara nodded, her voice soft as breath. "I understand." "You don't," Mrs. Doyle said with a sad little smile. "This house has buried its laughter. You'll see soon enough." A faint sound made them both look up. From the staircase above, the small shadow of a child flickered and vanished. Mrs. Doyle sighed. "She hears everything, but she speaks to no one." Just then, a man walked through the hallway, tall, composed, his movements polite but distant. He nodded briefly. "Thank you for coming. I'm Ethan Moore." His voice was calm, hoarse at the edges. His gaze lingered on Clara for half a second, then moved on. No questions, no explanations. As if in this house, everyone had learned that words no longer changed anything. By late afternoon, the light slanted through the wide windows, turning the floor into a wash of fading gold. Clara stood in the kitchen and began to cook. Simple food, just chicken soup, toasted bread, and sliced apples. When the soft warmth of the broth filled the air, the house seemed to breathe a little again. She carried the tray upstairs and set it in front of the blue door at the end of the hallway. "Lily," she said gently, "I'm leaving dinner here. You don't need to eat to make anyone happy. Just eat if you want to feel a little warmer." There was no answer, only the steady ticking of a clock somewhere behind her. Clara was about to turn away when she noticed a faint line of light glowing from under the door. A small night lamp, perhaps, flickering weakly, but still there, like a heartbeat refusing to fade. She went back downstairs, washed the dishes, dimmed the lights, leaving a single lamp glowing on the kitchen counter. As she passed the stairs, she stopped and looked upward. The narrow strip of light still shimmered, trembling slightly in the dark. She whispered to herself, "This isn't just cleaning. This is saving a small soul." Then she walked on, her steps light as if afraid to wake the sleeping sorrow above. Outside, rain began again, thin, cold drops sliding down the glass, dissolving like words left unsaid. And in that silent house, the first warmth didn't come from the fireplace, but from a steaming bowl of soup waiting quietly outside a closed door, and from the fragile hope in a woman's heart that tomorrow might, somehow, be different. The next morning, Seattle woke under a fine thread of rain. Clara rose earlier than usual, the chill seeping through the misted window pane. She went down to the kitchen, switched on the small lamp, washed her hands in warm water, and glanced around the still, silent room. Everything was exactly as it had been the night before. Except for one thing. The soup bowl was gone. She froze for a moment. Someone might have taken it away. Or maybe not. Mrs. Doyle entered, notebook in hand, her eyes flicking toward the hall. "I saw the empty bowl outside Lily's room this morning," she said, voice steady but eyes glistening. "Maybe the girl ate for the first time in over 20 days. Clara nodded softly, saying nothing. She didn't want to shatter that fragile moment with too much joy. When someone stands on the edge of despair, a single spoon of soup can feel like a miracle. The morning passed quickly. Clara worked non-stop, washing sheets, wiping the stairs, organizing the books in the living room. Yet her eyes kept drifting upward toward the blue door on the second floor. Each time she walked by, she paused for just a second, then moved on, as if teaching herself to wait without expecting. At noon, she placed a cup of warm milk and a few crisp biscuits outside Lily's door. No knocking, no words. Hours later, it was untouched. But by evening, when Clara returned, the cup was half empty. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that barely shows, but warms the heart like the first small flame in the dark. Ethan came home late. He stepped into the kitchen just as Clara was washing her hands. "Mrs. Doyle said Lily ate this morning?" he asked, his tone a mix of disbelief and caution. "Maybe," Clara replied. "But we shouldn't rush. It could have been just a moment." He nodded, eyes clouded with something he couldn't name. "Thank you. Really?" He turned to leave, then stopped halfway up the stairs, staring at the landing above. "I haven't gone into her room yet. I wouldn't know what to say." Clara dried her hands, stepped closer, and said gently, as if careful not to touch the ache in him, "Sometimes we don't need to say anything. Just be there." That night the rain had stopped. The house lay in a silence softer than before. Clara sat in the kitchen, jotting down notes for tomorrow's menu, when she heard faint footsteps upstairs. She looked up. A sliver of yellow light glowed through the railing. A small shadow moved, then disappeared. Clara smiled. The child was starting to move again. The next morning she rose early, making a new batch of chicken soup with thin slices of carrot. The scent filled the kitchen with warmth. When she brought the tray upstairs, she found the little stuffed rabbit neatly placed outside Lily's door, like a quiet greeting. Clara bent down and whispered, "Thank you, Lily." Later that afternoon, Mrs. Doyle found Clara by the window, holding an old copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, flipping through its worn pages. "Planning to read it to her?" she asked. Clara smiled. Not really. I'll just read it aloud, in case she wants to listen. That evening, Clara sat in the hallway, her back against the wall, her voice calm and steady as it floated through the quiet. When you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. The words drifted slowly, tender as a lullaby with no audience. But inside the blue room, a little girl was listening. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't haunted by the sound of her own crying. When Clara finished and stood, she heard a soft rustle from behind the door, like someone putting a book back on the shelf. No one spoke, but in that silence, two women, one grown, one small, had met each other halfway through their grief. Clara returned to her room, closed the door, and stood before the mirror, resting her palms on the dresser. She smiled faintly, not in triumph, but in the quiet joy of seeing hope kindle again in a child's heart. Outside, the wind carried a hint of salt from Puget Sound, brushing past the bare trees. And somewhere on the second floor, a little girl clutched her stuffed rabbit close, her eyes closing slowly, drifting into the first sleep she'd had in weeks, a sleep without tears. 2 days had passed since Clara read The Velveteen Rabbit in the hallway. The house was still as quiet as before, yet something small had changed. It was no longer the silence of absence, but the silence that listens. Early that morning, when Clara entered the kitchen, something unusual awaited her. On the spotless table, between the neatly stacked plates, lay a small folded piece of paper. She opened it. A child's uneven handwriting read, "Can you read again tonight?" She froze, her hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Doyle came in, saw the note, and gasped, covering her mouth. "Lily wrote that?" she whispered. Clara nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes, she wants to hear more." That evening, Clara sat in her usual spot in the hallway, her back against the wall, the book open on her knees. Her voice was calm and slow, each word falling into the air like raindrops on leaves. When you are loved for a long, long time, you become real. Behind the door, Lily sat on the floor, head resting against the wall, listening to every sound. She didn't speak, but her lips moved with the words. The gentle voice slipped through her fear, her grief through the wall she had built to keep the world out. When the story ended, Clara closed the book, resting her hand on its worn cover. "That's enough for tonight, Lily. Sleep well," she said softly. There was silence. Then, just before Clara rose, she heard the faint scrape of a chair and a tiny voice, fragile as wind brushing a leaf. "Thank you." It was the first word Lily had spoken since her mother died. Only 2 words, yet to Clara, they sounded like a symphony. She sat there for a long time, afraid that if she moved, the moment would vanish. The next morning, Ethan came home early from the office, something he rarely did. When Mrs. Doyle told him Lily had spoken, he almost didn't believe it. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the blue door, then stepped back. "I'm afraid to break whatever this is," he murmured. "You won't," Clara said gently. "Sometimes all she needs is to know you're there." That day, Clara cleaned, cooked, and read a few more pages. When she set down the soup tray that evening, she noticed something new. The little stuffed rabbit leaned against the wall, beside another note. "Do you like reading?" Clara smiled softly and wrote beneath it, "Very much. Do you?" Later that night, she returned and found a reply. "I do, but my mom read better than you." Clara sat down on the floor, staring at the childish handwriting, her heart both aching and warm. She picked up the pen and wrote, "I believe that. No one can replace your mom, but if you want, I can read when you miss her." That night, Clara read slower, her voice low and warm, pausing between lines as if leaving space for a mother's memory to wander among the words. And behind the door, Lily sat listening, her arms wrapped around the rabbit, eyes half closed but awake, afraid that if she fell asleep, the voice might disappear. When Clara finally rose, she saw Lily's shadow faintly outlined by the crack of light, small and fragile as the night lamp's glow. She didn't speak, only placed her hand gently against the door, a gesture that needed no words. She knew a thread had just formed between them, thin but real. Outside, the Seattle rain whispered again, streetlights breaking into gold on the wet pavement. Clara stood on the porch, eyes closed, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, her heart beat in rhythm with hope. Upstairs, Lily lay in bed, hugging the rabbit close, a small smile on her lips. And in her dream, someone was reading, "When you are real." And for both of them, a small miracle had begun. Since the night Lily first spoke, the house had begun to change. Not with noise, but with a light too soft to notice, warmer, gentler, like the breath of someone waking from a long dream. Clara kept reading every evening, faithfully, like a small ritual. Each time she passed the blue door, she found new little notes left on the tray. Sometimes a question, sometimes a doodle of a rabbit or a sun. It was Lily's way of speaking to the world, and Clara treasured each mark of ink as if it were a whisper sent through the silence. But in those quiet nights, Clara realized she was healing herself too. Each story she read for Lily reflected the memory of her own son, the one she'd lost years ago to illness, a boy who had once feared the dark and loved bedtime stories. Some nights her voice broke mid-sentence, and she had to pause to wipe her tears. By soothing a child's pain, she was unknowingly mending the broken part of her own heart. Then one afternoon, with the rain falling thin as silk outside the window, another note appeared. "I'll come down for dinner tonight. Will Dad eat too?" Clara held the paper, her hands trembling. She looked at Mrs. Doyle. Neither spoke. They knew. This was the first true step. Clara prepared dinner more carefully than ever. She made Lily's favorite chicken soup, buttered toast, and apple salad. The aroma filled the house, floating up the stairs. Ethan came home earlier than usual. Seeing the lights glowing in the kitchen, he paused at the doorway, his face a mix of surprise and fear. "What's happening?" he asked quietly. "Lily wants to have dinner with you," Clara said gently. "She's ready?" Ethan froze. His breath caught. He nodded slowly, straightening his collar as if preparing for the most important meeting of his life. When Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, the entire house seemed to hold its breath. She was thinner, her hair loose around her shoulders, the stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Her eyes flicked downward, then up, meeting her father's. For a moment they simply stood there, separated by memories rather than space. Ethan tried to step forward but couldn't move. Lily's voice came out soft as air. "I thought you didn't need me anymore." The words hit him like a blow. He took one step, then another, then stopped, eyes shining with tears. "That's not true, Lily," he said, his voice cracking. "I just didn't know how to go on. I was scared that if I looked at you, I'd see your mother everywhere. I buried myself in work because I couldn't face it." Lily's tears rolled down her small cheeks. "Mom said, when you love someone, you don't leave." Ethan dropped to his knees, his hands trembling. "I didn't leave, sweetheart. I just didn't know how to stay. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Ever again." No more words were needed. Lily let go of her rabbit and ran into his arms, burying her face in his shoulder. Ethan held her tightly, for the first time in months. He cried, not loudly, but in silent, shuddering waves, every tear carrying the weight of what he had been holding back. Clara stood quietly in the kitchen doorway, watching them. Her heart trembled in rhythm with theirs. In that moment, she understood. Some wounds can't be treated with medicine or advice, only with presence and love that refuses to leave. Dinner that night was simple and perfect. Lily ate small spoonfuls of soup. Ethan beside her, smiling through his tears. Clara sat across from them, silent but glowing inside, the way someone feels when they witness the first flower bloom after a long, cold winter. When the meal ended, Lily looked up, her voice small but clear. "I want to eat with Dad and you every night." Ethan squeezed her hand, nodded, then turned to Clara, his voice trembling but full of gratitude. "You've done what I couldn't." Clara smiled softly. "No, Mr. Moore," she saved herself. "I just stood where she could find me." Under the warm kitchen light, the three of them lingered. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the damp air still clung to the windows, reflecting their shapes. Imperfect, incomplete, yet together, learning again how to love. And somewhere in that quiet, the faintest sound of laughter, small and hesitant, returned to the house. After that dinner, the Moore house was never the same. The light spilling through the kitchen windows no longer felt cold. It glowed softly, wrapping around everything inside. The faint clatter of forks, the scrape of chairs, the sound of Lily's quiet laughter, all blended into the kind of music the house hadn't heard in months. Time passed. Spring came with short rains and the scent of damp earth. Lily began eating regularly, her cheeks coloring again, her eyes brighter. Each morning, Clara took her by the hand into the back garden, teaching her how to feel the dew on leaves and listen to the first sparrows of the season. They planted rows of lavender. Lily called it the Garden of Hope, and Clara only smiled, knowing the girl was learning to look toward the light again. In the afternoons, they baked together in the sunlit kitchen. Flour dusted their hands, their faces pink from laughter, and the sound of joy drifted down the hallway. Mrs. Doyle would pause at the doorway, whispering, "Good Lord, I'd forgotten how clear that child's laugh could be." Clara would just nod, eyes shining. Ethan was changing too. He no longer buried himself in work until midnight. He began coming home earlier, standing in the kitchen doorway, asking if Clara needed help with dinner. Sometimes he simply sat at the table, watching Lily shape dough, listening to Clara tell old stories. Each night, the three of them shared dinner, talking, laughing, together. No employers, no employees. Just people rediscovering the quiet comfort of belonging. One evening, while washing dishes side by side, Lily asked softly, her eyes serious, "Miss Clara, do you ever stop missing your son?" The question made Clara freeze. Her hand still held a wet plate, steam rising between her fingers. She turned, her voice slow and warm. "No, sweetheart, I never stopped missing him, but I learned how to remember and still keep living. When we truly love someone, they don't disappear. They stay, in us, in what we do, in every breath we take." Lily fell silent. She set the plate down and wrapped her arms around Clara's waist from behind. "I think my mom's still here," she whispered, placing a hand on her chest. Clara smiled and nodded. "I'm sure she is." After that day, Lily began to paint again. She painted skies, birds, lavender gardens, and three people sitting around a dinner table, a father, Miss Clara, and a faint, soft figure behind them with long hair flowing in the wind. When Ethan saw the picture, he stood still, eyes wet. He didn't ask questions. He simply stroked Lily's hair, afraid to disturb the fragile peace of the moment. Every night after Lily went to sleep, Ethan and Clara stayed in the living room a while longer. They rarely spoke. They shared silence, a quiet full of understanding and gratitude. Sometimes Ethan told stories of his past, his late wife, the guilt of not being strong enough. Clara listened, without judgment, without empty comfort, just presence. When he finished one night, he turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Without you, I don't think I could have been a father again." Clara smiled gently. "No, Mr. Moore, it was Lily who brought you back. I only reminded you that she still needed you." Outside, spring rain fell softly. In the golden kitchen light, the house seemed to breathe again. Clara looked toward the stairs where Lily slept, then back at Ethan. Between them, there was no longer the space of employer and servant, only the quiet bond of two people who had both been lost, now learning together how to live again. That spring lingered longer than usual. The Moore house was full of laughter, the smell of fresh bread, and the lavender scent from the garden. Everything seemed alive again, the walls, the light, the hearts within. But as always, when happiness finally settles in, the past has its way of finding the door. One Saturday morning, while Clara was watering the flowers, a black car stopped at the gate. The door opened, and a tall, well-dressed woman stepped out, her cream coat immaculate, her hair in a tight bun, her gaze sharp as glass. Mrs. Doyle froze mid-step. Good heavens! Mrs. Margaret? Margaret Collins, Ethan's former mother-in-law, Lily's grandmother. Her face still held that refined, proud beauty, but her eyes were dry and deep, carved by grief turned into judgment. She walked straight into the yard without greeting anyone, her gaze sweeping past Clara before fixing on the house. "I heard you hired a new housekeeper," she said coldly, "and that you've let her replace me in caring for my granddaughter." Clara didn't answer. She had never met Margaret before, but one look told her this was a woman who had loved her daughter so fiercely she could not forgive the world for taking her away. Ethan stepped out, coffee cup in hand. He froze when he saw her. "Mrs. Collins." "Don't call me that," she snapped. "I stopped being your mother the day my daughter died." Her voice cut like a blade. "I'm here for Lily. She needs a proper home, not this house full of ghosts and strangers." Lily had heard the commotion. She came down the stairs, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Grandma?" she said softly, her voice a mix of hope and fear. Margaret opened her arms, a strained smile on her lips. "Yes, my sweet girl, come with me. This isn't where you belong. Your father, he's moved on too quickly." The air thickened. Ethan set the cup down. His voice was low, steady. "That's not true. I haven't moved on, but I can't let my daughter live inside grief forever." "Do you even hear yourself?" Margaret hissed. "You've brought another woman into this house. She cooks for her, reads to her, takes her place. You call that healing? I call it replacement." Clara stood silent. Each word was a dagger slicing through the fragile calm. Lily stood between them, eyes darting from one face to another, torn between love, fear, and the fragile trust she had just rebuilt. "I'm not leaving," Lily said suddenly, her voice small but firm. "I want to stay here, with Dad and Miss Clara." Margaret turned sharply, as if struck. "You don't understand, dear. She's not your mother." "I know," Lily replied, tears shining but steady. "But Miss Clara helps me remember Mom without hurting. Dad and she make me feel safe." Ethan stepped forward, his voice deep and resolute. "Mrs. Margaret, I know you love her and I understand your fear. But here we are healing. Please don't break that." "And you think you know what's best for her?" she spat. "For the first time, yes," he answered. "Because now I listen and I see her smile." Silence filled the room. Margaret looked around, her gaze trembling for a brief moment, as if realizing she was the only one left fighting the past. But pride wouldn't let her show weakness. She turned away, her tone sharp and brittle. "You'll regret this. I'll be back. I'll take Lily home." "I've already chosen my home," Lily whispered, holding Clara's hand tight. Margaret didn't reply. She walked out, her heels striking the floor like thunder, fading into distance. When the door shut, the house still vibrated with the echo of her anger. Clara knelt and gathered Lily into her arms, stroking her hair. "It's all right, sweetheart. She's just worried about you." Lily buried her face in Clara's shoulder. "I know, but I want to stay here." Ethan stepped closer, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "And you will?" he said softly. "No one's taking you away again." Outside, spring rain began to fall again, gentle, forgiving. Inside, the three of them sat close together, silent but unbroken. The storm had passed, leaving behind something stronger. Lily, no longer afraid, now sure of one simple truth. She was strong enough to choose where she belonged. That summer came late, but it was gentle. After the storm, Seattle's sky cleared, the sunlight falling soft across the glass windows of the Moore house. Each morning, Lily's quiet singing floated down the stairs, blending with the sound of Clara watering the garden. Ethan often stepped out carrying 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for Clara, sat on the stone bench beside her. They didn't need to speak much. A glance, a nod, a small smile were enough to say the house was alive again, breathing and growing with them. Days passed in peace. Clara and Ethan tended the lavender garden together, their hands brushing soil as Lily ran in circles, sweeping leaves and laughing bright as wind chimes. In the evenings, the three of them read in the living room, each with a book, though Lily always asked Clara to read aloud. Ethan listened quietly, his eyes often lifting to Clara's face. Sometimes she looked up and met his gaze. They would smile, no words needed, both aware that something new was taking root between them, quietly and surely. One weekend, Ethan said, "I want to take you both somewhere. A quiet place. I think we need it." Clara looked surprised, but she agreed. On Saturday morning, they drove 3 hours out of the city, through fields of wildflowers until they reached a small wooden cabin by a lake. The water mirrored the pale blue sky, pine trees whispered in the wind, and the air felt light, as if breathing deeply didn't hurt anymore. Lily squealed with delight, tossing pebbles into the lake, her laughter echoing across the still water. Clara stood on the porch, watching Ethan carry the bags from the car. In that moment, she noticed how different his face looked, the fatigue gone, the shadows under his eyes replaced by calm, quiet warmth. That night, they built a fire in the hearth. Lily fell asleep early after a long day of play. Clara and Ethan stayed by the firelight, the orange glow painting the wooden walls and their faces. Outside, the lake lay still, the wind a soft whisper. Ethan turned the mug in his hands, his voice low but sincere. "Clara, I've been thinking about everything you've done for this house, for Lily, and for me. I think I owe you more than I can ever say." Clara smiled faintly. "You don't owe me anything, Ethan. I only did what needed to be done." He shook his head, his eyes fixed on hers, steady and warm. "No, you did more. You saved my daughter, and maybe you saved me too." Silence fell. The fire crackled. Ethan set the cup down, his breath trembling. "Clara, I know this might not be the right time, but I can't pretend anymore. I've fallen in love with you." Clara was still. The words didn't surprise her, yet hearing them aloud made her chest tighten. She stared into the fire, her voice soft, flickering like a candle's flame. "Ethan, I've lost so much. I once thought I had no room left for love, but I've learned that some love doesn't come to fill what's empty. It comes to remind us we're still alive." She looked up, her eyes calm and bright. "I've fallen in love with this family." Ethan smiled, a smile touched with both grief and joy. "And this family loves you back." Outside, the spring rain began again, soft against the lake, each drop tracing the window like a new beginning being written. The next morning, as they packed to leave, Lily came out of her room holding a large sheet of paper. "I made this for you and Miss Clara," she said proudly. It was a drawing she'd worked on all night, 3 people holding hands in a lavender garden, with a scrawled line above, my family. Clara touched the paper, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. Ethan placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, then looked at Clara. Neither spoke, because everything that mattered had already been said. It was the sweetest kind of acceptance. As the car pulled away from the cabin, Lily hummed softly in the back seat. Clara rested her head against the window, the scent of pine and lake air brushing through her hair. Ethan glanced at them in the mirror, his eyes gentle. A new beginning had come, not loud, not sudden, but soft, steady, and real. After the trip by the lake, their lives slowly settled into a calm rhythm again. But it was no longer the silence of grief, it was the stillness of peace. The wounds had closed, leaving soft scars, beautiful in their own quiet way. And then, as naturally as breathing, Ethan and Clara decided to make their bond forever. The wedding was held by the same lake, beneath a bright summer sky. Lavender covered the hillside, the air fragrant and light. It was a small ceremony, no grandeur, only family and friends who had witnessed their journey through pain. Clara wore a simple cream dress, her hair tied up softly, her eyes shimmering as Ethan took her hand. Lily, the little bridesmaid, carried wildflowers, her cheeks pink with joy. When the vows ended, Lily ran up holding a tiny box. Inside was a handmade wooden bracelet. "It's for you, Miss Clara," she said, her voice trembling. "Now I have two moms, one in heaven and one right here." Clara knelt and gathered her into her arms, tears and laughter blending into one. Ethan stood beside them, his eyes bright in the golden sunlight, as if every sorrow he had ever known was melting into quiet happiness. A year later, the house overflowed with light and laughter. Clara gave birth to a baby boy, Ben. He had his father's blue eyes and a smile like morning sunshine. Each day, Lily sat by the window holding her baby brother, singing softly, while Ethan and Clara watched from nearby, hands entwined. That evening, as Ben slept peacefully in his crib, Ethan whispered, voice hushed but full of warmth, "We found the light again." Clara looked at him, resting her hand on his, and smiled. Love never disappears. It just changes shape. Outside, the sunset pooled across the yard, its gold gathering on the windows. 3 figures sat close together in its glow, their laughter, their love, their peace, the heartbeat of a family reborn.